Look at any painting of Mary across 2,000 years of art. Notice something strange. Her face holds perfect peace. Serene. Calm. Almost emotionless in its tranquility. Museums worldwide display her image rendered by masters who never met her, yet all agreed on one thing: she possessed an otherworldly composure. But here's what disturbs the careful observer. This same woman watched her son tortured to death. She fled genocide as a refugee. She lost her child for 3 terrifying days. She heard prophecies that promised her soul would be pierced like flesh under a blade. So why does every artist paint her peaceful? What lies beneath that carefully composed expression? The answer requires descending into 7 specific moments of agony that religious tradition carefully catalogs, but rarely explores with brutal honesty. These weren't abstract theological events. They were lived experiences of a young woman whose life became a masterclass in enduring the unendurable. This is the story behind the peaceful face. The pain no one wants to examine too closely. The sorrows that shaped the most famous mother in human history. 40 days after giving birth, Mary walked through Jerusalem's crowded streets toward the temple. Her body still ached from childbirth. The ancient purification ritual required her presence, and she carried her firstborn son wrapped in cloth against her chest. Joseph walked beside her, carrying 2 small birds for the sacrifice. They were poor. The law allowed doves instead of lambs for families without means. The temple complex rose before them, massive stone blocks assembled by Herod's ambition and thousands of laborers. Smoke from morning sacrifices drifted across the courtyard. Pilgrims pressed forward, each with their own offerings and obligations. Mary held her baby closer. She had no way of knowing this routine religious obligation would deliver the first sword to her heart. The moment that would redefine everything she thought she understood about motherhood and divine purpose. Somewhere in that crowd, an old man was waiting. Simeon had been waiting for decades. The elderly prophet moved through the temple courts with purpose that morning. His eyes, clouded with age but sharp with spiritual sight, had been promised something by God himself. He would not die before seeing the Messiah. For years, this promise sustained him through the ordinary days of waiting. Then he saw them. A young couple, poor by their offering, carrying an infant who looked like every other baby presented that day. But Simeon's spirit recognized what his eyes could not prove. He approached without introduction, hands extended. Mary hesitated only briefly before allowing this stranger to hold her son. What happened next would echo through her mind for the rest of her life. Simeon's aged voice cracked with emotion as he blessed God, declaring he could now die in peace. His words painted her son as salvation, light, and glory. Mary felt pride swell. Then his eyes turned to her specifically, and everything changed completely. The blessing transformed into warning without transition. Simeon spoke directly to Mary now, his ancient hand still cradling her infant. The child would cause the rise and fall of many. He would be opposed. A sign spoken against. Then Simeon delivered the sentence that would haunt every subsequent moment of Mary's life. A sword would pierce her own soul. Not metaphorically. Not eventually. The Greek word he used meant a large, fierce blade designed for warfare and execution. This weapon would go through her psyche, her very essence, as surely as iron pierces flesh. The old man handed back her baby and disappeared into the crowd. Mary stood frozen in the temple courtyard, holding her son tighter. The purification ritual continued around her. Joseph touched her arm, concerned by her sudden pallor. She couldn't explain the sensation spreading through her chest. It felt exactly like Simeon described. The first thrust of that promised sword, arriving not at some distant future moment but right now. The knowledge itself was the beginning of piercing. Less than 2 years later, Mary woke to urgent shaking. Darkness still covered Bethlehem. Joseph's face hovered above her, illuminated by a single oil lamp, his expression communicating terror before his words could. They had to leave. Now. Not at dawn. Not after gathering belongings carefully. Immediately. He pulled her from bed while explaining in rapid whispers. An angel had appeared in his dream with a warning that sent ice through her veins. King Herod was hunting their son. Soldiers were coming to kill every male child under 2 years old in the region. The same king who had slaughtered his own family members without hesitation. The paranoid tyrant who saw threats in every shadow and eliminated them with efficient brutality. They had perhaps hours before armed men began systematic infanticide. Mary scooped up her sleeping toddler, wrapping him quickly. No time for extra clothing or provisions. No possibility of warning neighbors whose sons would die because hers lived. They fled into the night like criminals, though their only crime was giving birth to hope. The journey to Egypt stretched ahead like an impossible sentence. Hundreds of miles through wilderness and hostile territory with a small child and almost no resources. They joined the refugee currents that have flowed through human history since Cain fled east of Eden. Mary walked through darkness with her son pressed against her body, listening for sounds of pursuit. Every distant shout made her heart seize. Every approaching traveler could be a soldier checking for families with young boys. The night gave way to brutal daylight, and still they walked. Her feet bled inside her sandals. Thirst cracked her lips. The child cried from hunger and confusion, not understanding why his mother's arms trembled with exhaustion even as they held him tighter. Behind them, the slaughter had already begun. Mothers in Bethlehem were screaming as soldiers tore babies from their arms. Rachel weeping for her children, refusing comfort because they were no more. Mary heard none of it directly, but she felt it. The weight of survival when others died. The guilt that would never fully dissolve. Egypt received them as it had received Abraham and Jacob before them. Foreign soil. Foreign language. Foreign gods in every marketplace. They found shelter in a Jewish community that had formed in Alexandria, refugees among refugees. Mary set up a household in a single rented room that smelled of unfamiliar spices and damp stone. She watched her son grow in exile, learning his first words in a land that was not his inheritance. Every day brought the same questions circling her mind like vultures. When could they return? Was Herod dead yet? How many children died in place of hers? The sword Simeon promised had pierced again, this time with the blade of survivor's guilt. She had saved her son by fleeing, but dozens of other mothers had empty arms because of who her son was. The theological significance meant nothing to maternal instinct. She held a living child while others prepared tiny bodies for burial. The peaceful face she would later be famous for had not yet formed. In Egypt, in exile, in the desperate early years, her face showed exactly what it should, the haunted expression of a mother who escaped genocide by midnight flight. Years passed. Herod died. They returned to Nazareth and established normal life as much as any family harboring divine secrets could. Jesus grew. 12 years old now, on the cusp of religious adulthood. The annual Passover pilgrimage to Jerusalem had become routine. Large caravans of families traveling together, children running between groups, women and men often separated during the day's journey. The festival ended. The return journey began. Mary walked with the women, assuming her son traveled with Joseph and the men. Joseph walked with the men, assuming the boy stayed with his mother. This assumption lasted an entire day of travel before they compared notes at evening camp. The realization hit simultaneously. Neither had seen Jesus since Jerusalem. He wasn't with the caravan. 12 years old and missing in a city swollen with hundreds of thousands of Passover pilgrims. The panic that seized Mary in that moment made the flight to Egypt feel controlled by comparison. At least then she had held him. Now she had nothing but expanding terror and self-recrimination. They ran back to Jerusalem, reversing a full day's journey in darkness. The city that had seemed manageable during the festival now revealed itself as a labyrinth designed to swallow children. They searched for 3 days. 72 hours of escalating horror. Mary barely slept, her mind producing increasingly terrible scenarios. He had been taken by slavers. Fallen into a well. Kidnapped by zealots who might use him as leverage. Killed in some accident, and already buried by strangers. She searched every street, every marketplace, every public fountain. Her voice went hoarse from calling his name. Joseph questioned travelers leaving the city in case anyone had seen a boy matching his description. Nothing. The sword pierced deeper with each passing hour. This was different from the previous sorrows. Those involved clear external threats she could identify and flee. This involved her own failure as a mother. She had lost him. Simply lost him. The most precious responsibility ever given to a human being, and she had assumed he was safe without verifying. The guilt carved wounds that would never fully heal. The third day, near the point of complete despair, they found him in the temple courts. Sitting among teachers, asking questions, offering answers that made elderly scholars lean forward with interest. He looked completely unbothered. Calm. Engaged in intellectual discourse while his parents had been dying slowly of fear for 3 days. Mary's relief exploded into something closer to anger. Her words came fast and raw. They had been searching frantically. Suffering. Terrified. How could he do this? His response pierced the sword deeper still. Why were they searching? Didn't they know he had to be in his father's house? The words created instant distance. A chasm opening between mother and son. She had given birth to him, nursed him, protected him through genocide and exile, raised him for 12 years. But his real father was not Joseph. His real home was not Nazareth. His real business was not carpentry. He belonged to a mission that superseded family bonds. Mary understood this theologically. But standing in that temple courtyard, exhausted and emotionally shattered, she understood it viscerally for the first time. He was hers, but not hers. The sword turned slowly. 21 years later, Mary followed a different crowd through Jerusalem's streets. This time she was not bringing her son to the temple. She was following him to execution. The decades between his 12th year and his 33rd had brought gradual, agonizing confirmation of Simeon's prophecy. She had watched him begin his public ministry, heard the growing controversy, sensed the religious establishment's hatred crystallizing into murderous intent. She had warned him, begged him, perhaps, in private moments the Gospels never recorded. A mother using every argument available to convince her son to stop antagonizing the powerful men who controlled life and death. He had listened with love and continued anyway. Now the inevitable conclusion was unfolding in real time. The Roman governor had sentenced him. The soldiers had scourged him. The cross was being carried through the city to the execution ground outside the walls. Mary pushed through crowds that had once welcomed him with palm branches. Those same voices now shouted for his death. The mob psychology that turns humans into monsters had done its work efficiently. She forced her way forward until she could see him. The sight drove the sword so deep she felt it must be visible, protruding from her back. This was not her son. This was meat dressed in the torn remnants of her son's body. The Roman scourge had done what Rome designed it to do, reduce a human being to a bleeding canvas of trauma. His face was swollen from beating, features barely recognizable. Blood matted his hair from the crown of thorns soldiers had pressed into his skull as mockery. He staggered under the cross's weight, already dying before the execution proper had begun. Mary's mind couldn't reconcile this destroyed creature with the infant she had held 40 days after birth in this same city. The toddler she had carried to Egypt. The 12-year-old she had searched for frantically. Every mother's nightmare was unfolding in full public view. She could not look away. Could not intervene. Could not even touch him through the wall of soldiers and spectators treating this as entertainment. Their eyes met briefly through the chaos. What passed between them in that glance contained more communication than 1,000 words could carry. The procession moved toward Golgotha at the pace of dying. Mary followed, keeping him in sight, needing to witness what she could not prevent. Other women walked with her now. Mary Magdalene. Salome. Mary, wife of Clopas. They formed a small cluster of grief moving against the crowd's current. Men who had followed Jesus for 3 years had fled or watched from safe distances. The women remained. Not because they were braver, but because maternal instinct overrode survival instinct. A mother does not abandon her child, even when the child is a grown man being led to execution. even when watching will accomplish nothing except deepening trauma. The Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering, would be named later. For Mary, walking it in real time, it had no name yet. Only the immediate physical reality of following her son to his death. The dust. The blood drops marking the path. The jeering crowds. The indifferent soldiers. The hot sun beating down on the worst day in human history. She kept walking because stopping was impossible. The sword was fully inserted now. The next hours would twist it,